Long before the pyramids and spectacular temples that have come to symbolize ancient Egypt, King Narmer began the first dynasty of pharaohs. For more than 3,000 years, 345 pharaohs would rule Egypt. Some achieved glory and fame that still resounds today. Among them, the Macedonian conqueror, Alexander the Great.
Alexander did the impossible.
He was like all of his heroic idols before him. He was immortal.
Above all, Alexander the Great was shrewd. A Macedonian prince who rose to take his place on the throne of Egypt.
He was the new Ramses II, and he embodied a kind of renaissance in Egyptian culture.
He was also a brilliant military strategist.
Alexander was very clever, not just militarily, but diplomatically.
Now, through insights from leading international experts, you're about to hear the true story of this remarkable ruler made immortal by his legend.
He died in his prime. The legend was really being written as he went along.
Alexander could be below our feet right now.
Here are the last secrets of the unique story of Alexander the Great, a pharaoh whose life transformed the world. Alexandria. With 4 million inhabitants, it's Egypt's second most populous city after Cairo. And yet, 2,300 years ago, there was no reason to expect the region to become one of the most attractive locations in the Mediterranean world today. It owes its existence to the dream of a 25-year-old man and one of history's greatest heroes, Alexander the Great.
Alexander the Great is perhaps one of the most romantic of the world's conquerors, kings. There are so many stories about him, and in fact, even during his own lifetime, he was celebrated as a hero and hailed as a god.
Alexander the Great is one of the top 4 or 5 greatest conquerors in history. I'd say he's on the same level as Julius Caesar, Napoleon, and Genghis Khan.
He's probably the best embodiment of the idea of a legendary conqueror, someone who was young, who was truly intelligent, and had a whole entourage of people around him that would help him in his incredible conquest.
His extraordinary destiny was a turning point in the history of the Mediterranean and Asian worlds. This visionary and intrepid leader devoted the 13 years of his reign to the fulfillment of a unique dream, that of creating a universal empire at peace.
His political action as a universal ruler, he prepared the world for something that he had never seen. A creative synthesis of cultures that led to the creation of the Hellenistic era, the most multi-ethnic and multicultural society in the human history.
Never before had there been such a large empire. No one had ever managed to win so many victories and extend the boundaries of their empire so far. It's hard to imagine, but half of the known world was under Alexander's control.
Against all odds, this young Macedonian king became the pharaoh of Egypt at the age of 25. Alexander the Great would remain in the land of the pyramids for just 5 months of his life. 5 months during which he became not only one of the most iconic rulers of this legendary land, but also a living god. 5 months were all it took for him to revolutionize the history of this incredible civilization.
It was a period of tremendous upheaval, both for Egypt, which entered a new era of greatness, and for Alexander, who emerged from Egypt, a changed man.
What motivated someone to do this? What was his character? Is something that is a bit of a mystery and still a question we would like to know.
To understand how a young Westerner came to dominate one of the most powerful civilizations of antiquity, we need to go back 25 years and travel to the other side of the Mediterranean Sea. July 22nd, 356 BCE in Pella, the capital of the Kingdom of Macedonia, located 3,000 kilometers from Alexandria. Some of the remains of this ancient city have been miraculously preserved, giving us a glimpse into its once majestic beauty.
He was born on the evening of the burning of the temple of Artemis in Ephesus, an arson attack that left a deep impression on the ancient world, leading some authors to say that the goddess Artemis was so busy bringing Alexander into the world that she failed to protect her own temple. Even his birth heralded an extraordinary fate.
The first step in his destiny was to make his imposing father proud. Archaeological research has uncovered a veritable treasure trove evoking his power. The tomb and armor of the father of the future Alexander the Great, Philip II, King of Macedonia.
His father, Philip II, was a fierce warrior, quite wealthy, hard drinker, womanizer, and also a very, very cunning commander.
Philip II was raised in the military. He was brought up and educated and learned the best of the Greek tactics known to man.
This military leader was driven by a dream that would influence the mind of the young Alexander the Great, that of uniting Greece and taking revenge on their hereditary enemies, the Persians, and their immense empire.
Greece and Persia were long enemies by the 4th century BC. They had a 50-year war in the beginning of the 5th century, and this was a long conflict that created extensive animosity between these two regions.
The Persian king became really the person that controlled political affairs in Greece. Macedonia was a new political power. Macedonia had an army, a big army. Macedonia could confront the Persians.
Within a few years, Philip II succeeded in creating a coalition of Greek states and was ready to attack the Persians. Simultaneously, he ensured Alexander had the best education possible at the time.
It was both an athletic and an intellectual education. Alexander the Great was a consummate athlete. He practiced the pentathlon, which included running, discus throwing, javelin throwing, the long jump, and wrestling. He was also an excellent horseman.
Alexander, a model pupil, managed to prove his father wrong in a moment that would become part of the legend of the future pharaoh, the taming of the horse Bucephalus.
His father, Philip II, saw this horse that was quite wild, running around, and all these people tried to mount it, and no one succeeded. Philip was about to send the horse away, and Alexander said, "Father, let me try." And his father sort of went, "Pah."
Alexander, who was very cunning, understood that the horse was afraid of his own shadow, so he jumped on his back and raised the horse's head towards the sun.
He turned the horse so that there was no shadow, and he leapt onto his back, and then they rode. And after that, Bucephalus and Alexander could not be parted.
But it wasn't enough to be a good leader of men. To become the perfect head man, Alexander would need to learn from the best. When he was 13 years old, his father entrusted him to the greatest Greek scholar of the time, Aristotle.
Aristotle knew everything there was to know in the 4th century BCE. He taught Alexander history, geography, literature, and politics, and aroused Alexander the Great's scientific curiosity.
This was how Philip II prepared Alexander to one day take the throne. But even though he was the king's son, the young prince had competition. His father's second wife gave birth to 2 more sons, a development that, according to some sources, did not please Alexander's mother, Queen Olympias.
Olympias was incredible, like a character in a novel.
She was very much above the fray. She was not a woman who considered herself to be a fragile little thing. She was a headstrong, ambitious woman who slept with her snakes.
A very interesting woman. I wouldn't like to have her as an enemy.
Regularly humiliated by King Philip's behavior, she found meaning in raising her son. She trained him to become a great ruler, telling him that he was the son of Zeus, the god of heaven and lightning, and the most important of the Greek gods.
She did what all the ambitious mothers of antiquity did. She conditioned him to become an extraordinary man. She put enormous pressure on him, boosting his ego as much as possible.
She was a very strong woman. She wanted to interfere in politics, and she did. Definitely she did.
In 33 BCE, Philip II was assassinated by one of his bodyguards.
He was assassinated. He was murdered on the day of the marriage of his daughter. Who murdered him? This is a question. Someone was arrested, but really we don't know who really gave the order.
Could it have been Olympias? Or King Darius III of Persia? There's no way to know. Yet, in the chaos that followed the murder, Alexander was proclaimed King of the Macedonians. He was just 20 years old and still needed to prove himself, but he knew he was ready.
Alexander learned from his father. He was taught by his father, and he was very brave. That was from the beginning.
From the moment he took the throne, he had great ambitions for his kingdom, starting with fulfilling his father's dream.
Alexander's father, Philip, had already thought about trying to stop the Persians, but he died before that could happen. Alexander, however, decided that this was his fate and his destiny, and so he decided to go and take the army, improve upon it, and march against the Persians.
He undertook a seemingly impossible and insane mission to conquer the immense Persian Empire with just 40,000 men. Nearly everyone expected him to lose.
The Persian Empire was the largest in the world at the time. It extended from the Balkans to the Indus Valley. To attack it was to take a massive risk. But that didn't scare Alexander, who was determined to make history. Unfortunately, as his father's army prepared to pursue the Persians, Alexander had to face an unexpected enemy within. Philip II's death had weakened the coalition of Greek states. But in just a few months, the young king accomplished the feat of restoring order to the Greek world, displaying extraordinary leadership.
It was because he won his spurs on the battlefields of Greece that he was able to raise an army that would follow him to the literal ends of the earth. Alexander was already recognized by his army as an extremely intelligent military leader. He was a great strategist.
The young king of Macedonia didn't know it yet, but he was at the beginning of a campaign that would last 8 years. 8 years that would take him to the ends of the earth and to the throne of Egypt.
Alexander started on an epic journey of over 10,000 kilometers that stretched all the way from Macedonia to the Indus Valley. This was a size of a journey to take in one lifetime that people couldn't have even imagined. He started his journey going through Anatolia, and he had his first major battle at Issus.
After a year and a half of military victories, Alexander had a date with history at the edge of present-day Syria in Issus. It was time for him to face his father's enemy, the Persian king Darius III.
Darius III shows up to the battle very confident he was going to win. So he brings his whole family, he brings his mother, his wife, his children, to watch their father be victorious. But it turns out Alexander the Great was far better than he ever thought.
The Persian army was vastly superior in numbers. The ancient sources tend to exaggerate, but there must have been at least 120 or 130,000 soldiers on the Persian side, compared to about just 40,000 men fighting for Alexander.
But being outnumbered didn't scare Alexander. An expert technician, he knew he could rely on the formidable technique of the Macedonian phalanx, which he inherited from his father. By subdividing his army into compact blocks of soldiers equipped with 3-meter-long spears, the king was able to create a frighteningly powerful formation.
Alexander was the first to attack. He was there, and he inspired his soldiers. He was very brave, and this played a very important role. Darius did not participate really.
Alexander the Great showed himself to be a great strategist by coming up with a new tactic, the hammer and anvil. He diverted some of his soldiers to attack the Persian troops from behind, catching them in a vice.
Alexander, who led the Macedonian cavalry charge, managed to shake up Darius's army.
Surprised by Alexander the Great's daring and spectacular maneuver, Darius III knew he had lost the balance of power. Confusion reigned in his ranks. Suddenly, the unthinkable happened.
Darius's troops were completely disoriented and forced to retreat. Darius fled like a coward, giving Alexander the Great his first major victory.
It was a shameful retreat. Darius didn't even take the time to pick up the female relatives he had brought along, abandoning them in his camp.
The Persian soldiers quickly surrendered when they saw their king fleeing. Although he hadn't actually captured Darius III, Alexander the Great still savored his success. He had just defeated the most powerful army in the world, losing only a handful of men in the process. The young Macedonian king, a true visionary, showed unprecedented clemency in his triumph.
It was a huge victory for Alexander, who also took Darius III's female family members hostage. He respected them. He did not rape the beautiful Statira. He was already laying the foundations for his policy of reconciliation with the Eastern aristocracy, and he respected the women of the Persian nobility.
Better still, he treated his fugitive enemies' relatives as he would his own family. This was the start of Alexander's master plan.
That was the one thing that really impressed the people who knew Alexander. He wasn't just a bloodthirsty conqueror. He was really trying to embrace wisdom as his guiding principle.
And at this moment, it seemed that Darius tried to get peace with Alexander, and Alexander said, no, I don't want peace, I'm taking everything.
Despite having been wounded in battle on several occasions, Alexander the Great was determined to take over the entire empire of Darius III. But to that end, the young Macedonian conqueror had to gain possession of a Persian-held territory that he had coveted since the beginning: Egypt.
Egypt was a major part of the Mediterranean. It shared a border with the Levant, and also he had interest in Arabia potentially, and so this was a major route through the Red Sea. So this was a strategic location for Alexander.
Most importantly, the land of the pharaohs possessed the greatest of all treasures, indispensable to the survival of a great army, the natural resources to win all the wars in the world.
Egypt was the grain basket for the Persians and for everyone else, a wealthy country which had gold as well as gold that was food, wheat.
The famous Nile floods produced exceptional harvests that fed much of the Mediterranean region of antiquity.
And so if Alexander could control Egypt, he could feed his army and he could carry out his plan to basically dominate the Persians and a huge empire.
But that wasn't the only reason. Alexander also wanted to achieve a personal dream of his and reveal a secret that had remained unmentionable.
Alexander dreamed of Egypt because there, the pharaohs were more than just kings. They were gods. That was forbidden in the Greek world. Men were only men. Of course, for a great conqueror who dreamed of being considered a hero or even a god on earth, the only way to become one was to become a pharaoh.
Alexander the Great was fascinated by ancient Egyptian kingship and ancient Egyptian religion, and he wanted to emulate the ancient Egyptian kings, and he wanted to follow their understanding of a king being part divine, part human. And so he wanted to walk on the path of the ancient Egyptian kings.
When Alexander the Great and his army arrived in Egypt in 332 BCE, the land of the pharaohs had lost some of its luster. It was no more than a shadow of the extraordinary civilization that had fed the fantasies of Greek philosophers.
The Egypt of the pharaohs in the 4th century BCE was no longer what it had once been. There were no more great pharaohs. The country was already in decline, as if it were reaching the end of a cycle.
The Egyptians had been ruled by the Persians, and they did not like them at all. And so they were very happy when the idea that Alexander might come and liberate them from the Persians came about.
Alexander the Great easily defeated the Persian garrisons at the gates of the Nile. When he arrived in Pelusium, he was welcomed with honor by the Egyptians.
Alexander was hailed as a true liberator by the Egyptians, who had a negative image of the Persians.
Despite having to swim against the tide, Alexander also won the battle for people's hearts. Where the Persians had failed over several centuries of colonial presence, he succeeded in winning the love of the Egyptians.
Alexander was very clever, not just militarily, but diplomatically. And he knew that in Egypt, the way to win the hearts and minds was to get rid of the Persians, but also to adopt Egyptian customs. And this is something that he did by worshipping the gods.
A few days later, Alexander arrived in Memphis, the capital of northern Egypt, where the great pharaohs of the Old Kingdom, such as Djoser, Khufu, and Khafre, had reigned. It was here, in this symbolic place, that he was received by the high priest of Ptah, the god of the city. This meeting would forever change the destiny of the young conqueror on Egyptian soil. The year was 331 BCE. Alexander the Great, king of Macedonia, made further history by becoming Pharaoh of Egypt.
He received the pshent, the double pharaonic crown, and a set of pharaonic titles, 2 cartouches. On the first cartouche, which corresponds to his birth name, we read the name Alexandros, transcribed in hieroglyphics, as he was the first Greek pharaoh. On the cartouche showing his coronation name, we read Setepenre Meriamun, which means chosen by Ra, beloved by Amun.
Ra and Amun were 2 of the most important gods in the Egyptian pantheon. To mark his accession to the throne of Egypt, he sought to follow in the footsteps of one of the greatest sovereigns in the history of the kingdom of the 2 lands.
Setepenre Meriamun was also the coronation name of Ramses II, which Alexander took as his own. He was the new Ramses II, and he embodied a kind of renaissance in Egyptian culture.
One of the first things Alexander the Great did as pharaoh was to show respect for Egyptian traditions. Our teams have obtained permission to enter a unique site that will take us into the heart of the early days of Alexander's reign in Egypt. Egyptologist Salima Ikram will be showing us behind the doors of the Serapeum of Saqqara, located just a few kilometers from Memphis.
We are here at the Serapeum at Saqqara, and behind these doors lie the tombs of the sacred Apis bulls. The Apis bull was a sacred bull thought to contain the spirit of the god Ptah. So during this animal's lifetime, it was worshipped, it was looked after, it had oracular powers. And when it died, it was buried with great pomp and circumstance in a tomb in the Serapeum.
Alexander the Great had the privilege of burying a sacred bull. It was a milestone in the life of a pharaoh.
For a pharaoh, it was a great honor if he could install an Apis bull during his reign, but this didn't always happen because, of course, it depends on how long a bull lives and when it chooses to die.
As with the pharaohs themselves, the bull's corpse was mummified during a 70-day ritual. Although Egyptologists do have some information on its burial, the remains have not been found. It's impossible to know which of these 19 tombs might have housed Alexander's bull.
We unfortunately don't know which Apis it was because there are no inscriptions or anything that would really tell us. But we do think that there was the burial of one Apis and the installation of a new one during Alexander's reign. So probably one of the other sarcophagi in this section of the Serapeum belonged to Alexander the Great's Apis bull.
Alexander then went to the Libyan desert to consult an oracle who bore messages from the gods. He wasn't just any oracle. He was the bearer of the word of a god unlike any other, Zeus Ammon.
Zeus Ammon was not only an Egyptian deity, Zeus Ammon was a Greek deity as well.
In the temple of the oracle of this Greco-Egyptian god, Alexander listened to the divine message. What he learned would change the young pharaoh's life.
The texts tell us that the priest was tongue-tied and recognized him as the son of the god.
He disowned Philip II as his father. The official story was that it was the god Amun himself who entered his mother Olympias's bed in the form of a snake and was responsible for Alexander's divine conception.
Egyptian royalty were traditionally considered the sons of gods, so this gave Alexander full legitimacy as pharaoh.
Thus, Alexander became the son of Zeus Ammon.
This is exactly what he wanted to hear. He was like all of his heroic idols before him. He was immortal.
And this, of course, was very much in the Egyptian tradition. So by doing this, by following Egyptian rules, by showing himself as an Egyptian, he won hearts and minds, and therefore really managed to conquer Egypt and established this as a stronghold for his empire.
In just a few months, Alexander laid the foundations for a new Egypt, founding the 32nd Egyptian dynasty. As a reformer, he set up a strong administration with prefects in both Upper and Lower Egypt.
Until then, Egyptian civilization had been in decline under Persian domination. With Alexander, the time of decadence came to an end, and a religious and architectural renaissance began.
This gave him the sort of spiritual and political feeling that he could indeed go on and conquer and achieve all of his dreams.
Following in the footsteps of the 300 pharaohs who had ruled Egypt before him, Alexander, who now believed himself to be a god, had himself portrayed as such. The first Greek pharaoh in Egyptian history used the colossal statues of Ramses II and Amenhotep III as models for his own personal propaganda.
He is shown wearing these horns of Zeus Ammon. The coinage that was struck also shows him with these special horns, and he was really regarded with great warmth, it seems, by the Egyptians.
Representations of Alexander the Great in Egypt remain rare, so much so that some of them raise questions, like this monumental statue at the Egyptian Museum in Cairo. Egyptologist Meredith Brand explains the mystery surrounding this colossus.
Everything about it looks like Alexander. He's got a Greek kind of tousled hair underneath a very Egyptian crown. He's wearing the kilt that we connect with ancient Egyptian kingship. And in many ways, this is how Alexander showed himself. But there's a controversy around this colossal. It doesn't have an inscription.
Might this be the statue of Alexander the Great as pharaoh? It's impossible to say for sure, but when you compare his face with that of this statue, there's a clear resemblance.
This is the real Alexander the Great. He's young, he's energetic, he's intelligent, he's active. This statue is almost like a propaganda feature for Alexander the Great. It shows him to the world as someone who is athletic, strong. His hair is loose and almost like perpetually in motion, like this is a young man running. He's got a mission. And it shows him as this vital conqueror.
After conquering the hearts of the Egyptians, he wanted to make the land of the pharaohs a stronghold of his empire. To that end, he decided to build a city that would demonstrate his strength and influence, a city that would become a legend.
Alexander had to found a new capital because Pella was too remote at this point, considering all the new land he had conquered.
Alexander was someone who was a great forward thinker as well, and he looked basically the topography of the north coast of Egypt, and he thought, we need ports, we need ways of getting to and fro, trade, military movement.
One of the most mythical cities of antiquity, the first of some 20 Alexandrias that would eventually be built throughout the empire, the Egyptian Alexandria, as imagined by the Macedonian pharaoh, was a vast, luxurious city.
They built palaces, the Lighthouse of Alexandria, and the Great Library.
Alexandria became the jewel of the Mediterranean. It was one of the most beautiful cities in the world. In essence, Alexandria was the most cosmopolitan city ever known at the time.
But Alexander would never see his capital city complete. When he left Egypt in the spring of 331 to pursue his dream of conquering the Persian world, little did he know that he would never return to Egypt in his lifetime. In October 331 BCE, Alexander faced Darius III once again, this time at Gaugamela in what is now northern Iraq.
The Battle of Gaugamela should have marked the return of Darius III. But once again, Alexander proved to be a shrewd strategist. He lined up his men facing those of Darius III, knowing that Darius would start by sending out his scythed chariots.
Scythed chariots were horse-drawn chariots with long blades attached to their wheels. These diabolical war machines would cut off the men's legs at calf level.
Alexander was smarter than Darius III, however, and he led the scythed chariots into a trap. He instructed his men to split to let the chariots through the line, then kill the coachman and the horses, thus eliminating the chariots.
Alexander used the same tactics as he did at Issos, leading the cavalry charge and forcing Darius to retreat. Once again, the Persian king fled in complete disgrace toward the east and northern Iran, where he would be assassinated sometime later by his entourage for his pathetic military showing.
After this historic victory, Alexander the Great continued to write his legend. When he entered Babylon, the capital of the Persian Empire, he was welcomed with open arms by its inhabitants.
At this moment, the entire Persian Empire realized that everything was done. So many Persian satraps or governors decided to lay down their arms and join forces and give allegiance to Alexander the Great.
He obtained the treasure of Babylon. It was a staggering treasure. We're talking 200 or 300 tons of gold, meaning enormous quantities. So his passage through Babylon gave him the means to fulfill his ambitions.
Between October 331 and spring 325 BCE, Alexander conquered the entire Persian Empire. He went even farther, where no Western conqueror had gone before, to the banks of the Indus between India and present-day Pakistan.
He made conquests from northern Greece to the gates of India, all in just a few years. It was an epic undertaking, something straight out of a fairy tale.
Despite being seriously wounded, Alexander nevertheless managed to lead his army to victory in India. But mistrust was growing in his ranks. Tired of his dreams of conquest, some of his soldiers wanted to return to Macedonia. What's more, Alexander had married a Persian princess, Roxanne, which was frowned upon by his men.
It was not something that he introduced. Political marriages for political reasons existed in all history of Macedonian royal families. She was not Greek. She was a barbarian, and that was difficult. And he was criticized by his friends, by his companions. We know that there were quarrels and problems.
With instability in his ranks, Alexander became paranoid and turned to alcohol for consolation. Although he was growing increasingly unpredictable, his dreams of glory didn't stop there. He remained in Babylon while preparing his conquest of Africa. But he would never leave the city again alive. In the winter of 324 BCE, Hephaestion, his lifelong friend and the true love of his life, died of an illness. The inconsolable pharaoh Alexander the Great consulted the oracle of Amun. After his visit, he decided to dedicate a hero cult to his lover. Hephaestion became an unforgettable mythical and legendary figure. His death marked the beginning of the end for the great conqueror. On May 31st, 323 BCE, Alexander held a massive banquet for his guests. He drank more and more without stopping. Suddenly, in the middle of the feast, he collapsed as if struck by lightning. The next day, he woke up with a high fever. It was the start of 2 weeks of throes, during which the most powerful man in the world suffered in agony. His spine and joints could no longer take the strain, and he was in extreme pain.
It had all the elements of a great tragedy.
Alexander the Great died on June 10th in Babylon. He was just 33 years old.
He died in his prime. The legend was really being written as it went along.
Nobody expected Alexander to die, and the texts tell us that his body was simply left there for a while. People were in such a state of shock that they didn't know what to do.
The cause of his death remains shrouded in mystery. How could this warrior, who defeated even the most powerful enemies on the battlefield, die so young?
In the ancient sources, he's generally said to have died of poisoning, but modern-day historians doubt that was the truth.
Some say he died of fever, others say it was some form of alcohol poisoning.
What really happened? Alexander had traveled to uncharted territories. Could he have caught some incurable disease?
We know a lot about Alexander's final days, which allowed doctors to try to make a post-mortem diagnosis.
Alexander was a hard liver, and he was in places that were very unhealthy. So he might have gotten what was malaria, very sick with fevered dreams and high fever.
His unexpected death marked the end of his conquests and his dream. Never before had there been such a large empire. No one had ever managed to rack up so many victories and extend the boundaries of their empire so far. How were they to honor the memory of this legendary conqueror?
What were they going to do with the body of Alexander the Great? They couldn't leave it in Babylon, but there were only so many ways to transport it. They decided to do as they did for the pharaohs and mummify him.
In Macedonia, the tradition was to cremate the body of the deceased. But that's not what Alexander wanted. Before his death, he had confided to those close to him that he wished his body to be mummified and buried in the temple of Amun at Siwa in Egypt, where he had heard the revelation of the gods.
It was essential to preserve his body, which was the remains of a god. So he was mummified in Babylon.
But the king's decision to be buried in Egypt as a pharaoh was not respected. His mummy became a pawn in what was the beginning of a terrible war of succession. Although Roxanne was pregnant with Alexander the Great's son, the rightful heir to his throne, his loyal generals undertook a merciless battle to replace him.
There were no clear successors who were old enough to deal with anything. And so, naturally, all of this sort of started to create conspiracies, and his empire started to break up, with the different generals wanting to take parts of it.
Just as the body of the great conqueror was on its way to the royal necropolis of his dynasty at Ege in Macedonia, the unthinkable happened. Ptolemy, the governor of Egypt and one of Alexander the Great's most loyal generals, sent his men to attack the convoy.
Ptolemy knew that the person who buried the king of Macedonia could claim successor. So he decided to hijack the body and take it to Egypt so that he could bury Alexander.
Of course, once Alexander was there, Ptolemy had complete legitimacy over Egypt and a large part of the Eastern Mediterranean, and he took over and had Alexander as sort of someone who gave Ptolemy legitimacy to rule.
Ptolemy had the pharaoh's body mummified once again and buried it temporarily in Memphis before moving it to Alexandria. There he displayed the mummy in a magnificent sarcophagus inside a tomb that was to be his final resting place.
This amazing crystal sarcophagus, which was filled with honey, and his body was suspended, and he looked as if he was still alive. And of course, this was very potent because he was like the sleeping king who was come back one day, rise again, and save his country.
It was in the 3rd century, when Egypt was under Roman domination, that the body, sarcophagus, and tomb of Alexander the Great were lost to the twists and turns of history. Since then, finding them has been the object of an insatiable quest by archaeologists of all kinds. But the task is far from simple.
He might have been buried somewhere near here. We know, according to ancient historians, that Alexander was somewhere in the public parts of the city. And that's where we're standing now, according to the map. So who knows? Alexander could be below our feet right now.
It's out of the question today to start knocking down buildings just to see what's underneath, but it's still a great mystery. We don't know where Alexander is.
Over the past century and a half, more than 60 archaeological operations have been carried out to no avail. But one site in Alexandria continues to intrigue Egyptologists. It's closed to the public, but we obtained special permission to enter with Thomas Fauché, director of the Centre d'études Alexandrines.
This is the Alabaster Tomb. It's an extraordinary monument with large sections of alabaster walls, reminiscent of Macedonian tombs.
This tomb of alabaster, a naturally white material, is located near the old Canopic Way at the gates of the city, a heavily trafficked location during the period after Alexander's reign. Its architecture is reminiscent of the tomb of Philip II, Alexander the Great's father. On the outside, it was covered by a tumulus, or mound of earth, exactly like the Macedonian burials discovered in northern Greece.
This tomb is accessible via a staircase, but the exterior is covered with soil, so the external portion is not decorated, since it's not visible to the public. You have to imagine a staircase, an antechamber, and then the naos, where King Alexander's sarcophagus would have been.
This stone is of the finest quality, perfectly crafted, just like the door, which was carved out of the rock. Almost as heavy as granite, it must have taken considerable logistical efforts to bring this rock here and carve it. All these details raise questions. Was this tomb built to venerate Alexander, or house his mummy for a time? The mystery of the alabaster tomb has never been solved.
What we do know is that this building was extremely important. It's very well made, it must have cost a lot of money, so it's hard to imagine it having been anything other than a royal monument. Was it a kind of facsimile temple of Alexander's tomb for travelers and pilgrims to Alexandria? We can't know for sure, but we can imagine.
What happened to the tomb of Alexander the Great? As early as the 4th century, Alexandria was hit by several major earthquakes, with the sea flooding the land and washing away certain buildings. All the clues point to a single hypothesis, that the tomb of Alexander, Egypt's first Greek, is now under the sea, along with that of the last pharaoh queen, Cleopatra.
The search for Alexander's tomb will forever continue, even though it's extremely likely that the sarcophagus will never be found. But the story goes on and the legend continues. People want to find something tangible. There will always be new excavations to try and determine at least the location of Alexander's tomb.
While his tomb was never found, his capital city of Alexandria became that of the Ptolemies, the last of the 33 Egyptian dynasties. His dream of universalism and his iron will to unite people remain a precious legacy admired around the world.
Alexander did the impossible. He tried to establish an empire where all languages, all religions were accepted, which was something impossible for that period.
Above all else, the ultimate conqueror that was Alexander the Great won the hearts of the Egyptians by respecting their culture, an initiative that will remain trailblazing in the history of civilization.